Tomorrow on Balance with Leland starts right now.
Tonight, exclusive reporting from New York to Austin, Texas, to Minnesota to Southern California. Protesters claim they just want a free Palestine.
We're not doing anything!
We expose the much more sinister truth than just anti-Semitism.
If this is not contained quickly, and if these threats and intimidation are not stopped, there is an appropriate time for the National Guard.
And why congressional Republicans won't be able to fix the problem. Maybe he's right.
I should be right now in Pennsylvania, in Florida, in many other states.
Does Trump's lackluster showing in Pennsylvania prove he really does need to be on the campaign trail?
Nikki Haley, who you know suspended her campaign, still got more than 156,000 votes.
And how could tomorrow's arguments at the Supreme Court decide the 2024 election long before we go to the ballot box? And the curse of first.
With the first pick, Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson,
Justin Fields, Mac Jones.
NFL fans across the country hope tomorrow's draft will bring their team a winning season.
Former Jets starting quarterback and number 2 overall pick, Zach Wilson, is now being traded to the Denver Broncos.
A promise that almost never works out.
How surprised were you that Justin Fields got traded to the Steelers?
I'm not surprised, but I'm surprised.
Why is the NFL so bad at picking talent?
No, I want my picks back, all of them. I want all 3 years of this team's future back.
That's not fair.
Well, you want to cry about it, Tom, or you want to make a little magic before the clock runs out on both of us?
Welcome to the fairest show on television. First tonight, the sinister truth of what is happening on college campuses across America, and perhaps more importantly, who's behind it. Tonight, protests are growing literally by the hour. What started at Columbia University in New York City is spreading west to campuses like the University of Texas at Austin and to campuses in Southern California. And we finally found out the ultimate goal of these protests based on 5 simple words from the man who organized Columbia's. Kamani James was involved in the Black Lives Matter movement before hopping on the Hamas bandwagon. Just listen for a second to what this guy there on the left, was during Black Lives Matter. On the right is him talking to NewsNation cameras at Columbia. Same guy. Just listen to what he said during a Board of Education meeting in his hometown of Boston back in 2021.
My name's Kamani James. Saying I hate white people is not racist. In order for white people to experience racism, they'd have to have socialized power structures against them, which they don't. White people are the creators of those socialized power structures, and they're specifically designed to oppress black people. White people are the problem in a lot of cases in society. I, too, hate white people.
There it is. I, too, hate white people. Those 5 words tell you everything you need to know about the protests and the protesters that are spreading across America's college campuses. From Columbia University to the University of Michigan to the University of Texas at Dallas, UC Berkeley, and beyond. It's about a neo-Marxist worldview related to identity politics that has commandeered the progressive left, and it seeks to tear down America and the ideals we stand for. The oppressor versus oppressed matrix drives most of the ideology on America's college campuses. Hence why there is now a ring of professors from Columbia. There's a ring of them surrounding the protesters to keep journalists from asking the protesters any questions. And of course, the protesters won't show any of their faces. They cover them with masks. Just like how the Black Lives Matter movement wasn't really about black lives, the self-described pro-Palestinian protesters aren't about the Palestinians either. NewsNation's Rich McHugh spoke with James again today, live at the protest at Columbia, with us again tonight. Rich, what do you got?
So, Leland, we've been reporting today that the police and the university are focused on non-students, like professional agitators from outside, protesters that are organized. So I had the opportunity to talk to James, and my first question, I asked him point blank, are any of the people in this encampment here non-students? Are they from the outside? Here's his non-answer. Take a look.
Our community guidelines state that people can have entrance into our encampment as long as they're respecting community guidelines. Some of those community guidelines, the most important ones, being that we do not allow for any discrimination or bigotry of any kind.
Now, he says they do not allow for any discrimination or bigotry of any kind. Just want to remind our viewers that on Sunday night, we have this video here filmed by Jewish students who are inside the encampment, and this person was calling for a human chain because they had Zionists in their midst. So this is also one of the leaders of this encampment, one of the people who the university administration is negotiating with. That's the situation here, Leland.
Yeah, pretty stunning that they are negotiating with these folks rather than just throwing them out. Real quick, Rich, this is the same guy who said, right, I too hate white people. Were you able to ask him about any of those past views, and obviously ask him about his current views that call for the killing of Jews?
I tried to go back in after this impromptu press conference, and they said media time is closed. He had disappeared. And so, no, I was not able to ask him any of these questions. They're very, very selective. They formed a human chain. They wouldn't let any press back into the encampment.
Fascinating. Rich, keep asking the smart questions and the tough questions. That's what we do as journalists of everybody. We appreciate it. Thank you. Republicans in Congress came face-to-face with Columbia protesters this afternoon. Speaker Mike Johnson addressed the roaring crowd, saying he is demanding President Biden take action to secure campus.
There is executive authority that be appropriate. If this is not contained quickly, and if these threats and intimidation are not stopped, there is an appropriate time for the National Guard. We have to bring order to these campuses. We cannot allow this to happen around the country. We are better than this.
All right, New York Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis joined the Speaker of the protest and is with us now. Appreciate you joining us, ma'am. Thank you. I guess I understand if it's public universities why Congress would start to get involved, although thinking about sort of the way the Constitution's designed, you've got Congress, and now all of a sudden you've got Congress demanding what needs to happen on private university campuses. How does that work?
Well, because this is clear anti-Semitism that we're seeing. We met with Jewish students today, and not only have they been bullied and threatened, they've actually, some of them, been assaulted, spat on. They've had to walk their campus and see swastikas painted. This is clear anti-Semitism, what Columbia University is allowing. And it's unacceptable in New York City and in the United States of America. This is no longer talking about free speech. This is clear anti-Semitic activity that is taking place on the campus. And the president of the university has really no plan to end it, put an end to it, put a stop it. As you said, kick these individuals out. Instead, she's just hoping that they leave. And that, to me, is not how you run an institution of higher learning. She has shown that she has completely lost control of the campus, that she cannot keep her students safe, forcing them to go into virtual learning because she cannot keep the students safe. And that is why I reiterate my call for
you get
her
no
resignation.
argument. Mm-hmm. You get no argument from me on any of those facts. I'm not sure how her resigning in the board, putting in somebody who's sort of equally as weak on these issues, does any good. And I understand that. I'm trying to figure out why that is an issue that Republicans who believe in limited government believe the United States Congress should get involved in.
Well, because these are American tax dollars that are going to fund these institutions. And we quite frankly feel that those American tax dollars perhaps should be stripped if this is the type of activity that's taking place on these campuses. So that's why we're there. We are looking at legislation. I've actually introduced my own legislation that would put a process in place when something like this rises to anti-Semitism, that it would allow for a process to take place for the Secretary of Education to strip federal funds. And I think this is becoming a much larger discussion in Congress about 501c3s that are being used and the political arms that are associated to them, foreign dollars that are coming into some of those 501c3s that then turn around and advocate for or against candidates. So I think there's a whole thing about following the money here, seeing what's actually being funded, and how do we prohibit this type of anti-Semitism from taking effect.
Well, you could make the point this goes far beyond anti-Semitism, right? Anti-Semitism saying you don't like bagels or Jews can't come into my club. This is calling for the killing and the mass slaughter of an entire country at one level. And at another level, you heard, it's about tearing down much of America's construct. If you listen to the organizers, it goes far beyond the Palestinians. It's neo-Marxist Black Lives Matter groups. But at the same time, and I ask this respectfully, but Republicans just ended up passing a $95 billion bill that included $60 billion for Ukraine. I'm old enough to remember when Republicans were resolute, no funding for Ukraine without border security. And you guys couldn't even get border security through. So I applaud that you want to do something and you're trying to help. But how should Americans take it seriously when Republicans say, oh, we're going to strip funding and we're going to do this and this and this, when they can't even get something as simple as border security done?
Well, I agree with you and share your frustration on not achieving the border security that I feel that should have been extracted in that negotiation. It's why I voted against the additional $60 billion going to Ukraine, because we were told by leadership that they were going to be coming hand in hand together as one, and that we wouldn't do one without the other. So I agree with you on that front. And the thing is that we've passed multiple border security measures. So the House has been doing its job. The problem is that the Senate and the White House, I mean, they control 2/3 of the government. They refuse to pass any border security measure, meaning the President of the United States passed 60 policy changes when he came in at the border. He refuses to undo any of them.
I know. I think you're.
No, I know, but that's the thing. The thing is.
Let me pivot back. Let me just pivot back then to the issue at hand, which is what's going on these universities. I think what you're agreeing with me on is that saying that we're going to introduce legislation, or you're going to introduce legislation that's going to strip funding from Columbia and other universities that allow this kind of behavior is much more symbolic than actually has any chance of passing a Democratic-controlled Senate and being signed by a president who's clearly afraid of these folks.
Well, I don't know what the Senate will do in this situation. I mean, the highest-ranking Jewish elected official is Senator Schumer. He controls the Senate. You would think that he would bring a bill like that to the floor for a vote. I mean, we can only control what we do in our chamber.
Yep.
And what we've done, quite frankly, are the things that the American people want. And if they want these things to pass the Senate and they want the president to sign it, well, maybe they need to look at electing more Republicans who share our values to the Senate and getting rid of this president who just undoes just everything against the will of what the American people want.
He both sides these protests, right? I mean, he talked about how there, you might say there are very fine people on both sides, just to paraphrase him. Congresswoman, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
All right. To be fair, there are a lot of protesters who genuinely care about the plight of the Palestinians, and the Palestinians obviously have some legitimate grievances. So why do all these protesters keep parroting terrorist talking points?
APD, KKK, IDF, they're all the same. APD, KKK, IDF, they're all the same.
And Donald Trump headbacks to court tomorrow, which means he won't be at the Supreme Court for a case that could decide the presidential election before the first vote is cast. How absolute is presidential immunity?
As a president, you have to have immunity. Very simple. And if you don't, as an example, if this case were lost on immunity and I did nothing wrong, absolutely nothing wrong, I'm working for the country.
Welcome back. Live pictures of the protest on the campus at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. We'll keep watch on campuses around the country as the hour develops. In the world of a college protester, there is one conflict, only one, raging in the world. Israel against Hamas. But in reality, there are more than 60 armed international conflicts, occupations, and potential genocides happening around the world. Sudan, for example, in Africa, they've been at war since 1983. Famine and atrocity crimes have been well documented throughout the country. Sudan, South Sudan, throughout the conflicts, ultimately estimated 2 million people have been killed. We'll zoom back out because it's, of course, not just Sudan. There's Syria. Here's Israel. There's Syria. Look at what is happening in Damascus, Syria. The map will work. March 2011 is when the uprising in Damascus began. The conflict in Syria has killed an estimated 500,000 people. Millions more have been displaced. Of course, it's led by Bashar al-Assad, a Muslim with a war on fellow Muslims. Don't hear much about Syria anymore these days. We'll zoom back out. One place of particular note that you don't hear anything about, nobody ever protests, is China. Chinese government has put more than 1 million ethnic Uyghurs, they are also Muslims, into mass internment camps in the country's northwest region. We've shown you this video before. It's of trains taking the Uyghurs to concentration camps. It's kind of like the Nazis. They did the same thing to the Jews, and now Chinese are doing it to the Muslims. But we don't hear very much about that. The only group we hear about is the Palestinians, and that's what's brought out thousands of kids to college campuses around the country. Osama Sablami is here, organized a number of protests against the war in Gaza, publisher of the Arab American News. It is good to see you, sir. As always, thank you. Why don't you think we hear more about 1 million ethnic Muslims facing genocide in China, or Bashar Assad killing 500,000 of his fellow Muslims in Syria?
We do. We hear about this. We live their tragedy as well on a daily basis. But that doesn't mean that what's happening in Gaza is not a genocide and it's not something that should be condemned, especially that our tax dollars is at work there, not in Syria and not in China and not in Sudan, but certainly in Israel. We are giving Israel the bombs that kills people. And it's financed by our tax dollars. And that is the problem. The problem is that we are, declaring ourselves.
Yeah, but hold on, Osama. Hold on. We've said before, and I would say that there are legitimate grievances against how Israel is prosecuting this war. We can agree or disagree on those. I would disagree it's a genocide. You're going to say it is. But there's a difference here when we go and we look at these protests. They're not calling anymore for a ceasefire. The chants aren't anymore about a two-state solution and Palestinians living side by side. You have people yelling at Jews, "I am Hamas." October 7th is going to happen day in and day out. That's calling for more murder. That's calling for more violence. How is that okay?
These are few people. Maybe they're implanted. Maybe they are doing it on their own.
Come on.
The movement, but what I'm telling you.
No, Osama, come on. We can have a conversation, but we got to deal with it. We got to be honest about the facts. Hold on.
These are not
from the river to the sea. That doesn't leave room for Israel. That is the chant. Okay, how are we going to get justice? Burn Tel Aviv.
There is no room for Israel. Israel has committed a mass murder in here. If 33,000 is not enough, what is enough? 60,000? 100,000? You want 1 million to be killed? How many people we should let Israel kill before we start calling it a genocide? It is a genocide. It looks like genocide. It acts like genocide. Israel is continuing. They don't care. They don't give a damn. Now, this is a grassroots movement. These are not organized people. These are not organized chants. These are chants that we have heard for years and decades. The situation did not start October 7. Leland, it started in 1948. This is not only 33,000 have been killed. They have been killing Palestinians since 1948 and so many other massacres.
You're not, hold on. Osama. Okay, Osama. Oh, fine. There's been many people killed. We can agree on that. We can agree there's been many people killed on both sides. But what's different is there's not a view of who's responsible for that. And we got today a video from Hamas of them holding an Israeli hostage. Now, when this young man, when Hirsch was taken on October 7th, okay, he had two hands. He now is seen in this video without a hand. If you really want peace, if you really want a ceasefire, if you really want the Palestinians in Gaza to be free, doesn't that require Hamas to give up the hostages and, frankly, for Hamas to give up power as well?
Leland, since October 7, Israel has detained over 8,000 Palestinians, young and women, children, men and women, old and young. Israel is not innocent. Israel has committed crimes against humanity in here. Now, you want me to condemn Hamas for doing this? I will condemn it. Would the world condemn what Israel is doing? That is what we need to hear. Don't hear me what I say about Israel. I want to hear what the world is saying about the atrocities that the Israelis are.
There's a lot of folks. There's a lot of folks on college campuses talking about it.
One more thing important. These are not anti-Semitism. These chants are not anti-Semitism.
Okay.
Anti-Israel is not anti-Semitism. Most of the people who are demonstrating occupy the Rotunda.
That is a kind of Osama, I understand your point. Disagree with it, but we got to pick it up at a different time. It's an important conversation to have. Osama, thank you very much, as always, for joining us. We enjoy it. Tomorrow, the Supreme Court hears Donald Trump's immunity arguments, how the court could change the 2024 election without doing anything. Tomorrow, lawyers for Donald Trump will argue before the Supreme Court that he gets absolute immunity for everything he did as president, or at least everything he did on January 6th and leading up to January 6th, something we've heard Trump say again and again as he's tried to get the charges against him about January 6th thrown out.
Presidents have to be given total immunity. They have to be allowed to do their job. Presidential immunity is imperative. It's going to be very, very important. As a president, you have to have immunity. Very simple. I was entitled as president of the United States and commander-in-chief to immunity.
Prosecutors argue Trump and others orchestrated a scheme to keep him in power despite losing the 2020 election. And now they say he's purposefully delaying the case. Constitutional law attorney, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General, our friend Tom Dupree is with us. Good to see you. I almost want to start at the end first. Is there a chance that we don't get this ruling before the election?
No, I think we will get a ruling before the election. The Supreme Court will decide this case before it adjourns for the summer, that is to say by the end of June. But it may not fully decide the issue. In other words, what the Supreme Court could say is that, well, there is some degree of presidential immunity, but we're not quite certain of the contours of it, how it applies to Trump's case. So we're going to send this case back to the lower courts to figure out whether some of these charges do fall within the scope of immunity, which could string things out dramatically.
Wait, so that strings things out, so all of a sudden it goes to the lower courts, and then it gets appealed again, and somehow the Supreme Court isn't available until the election.
That's exactly what could happen. Look, the Supreme Court has several different roads open to it. It could deliver a clear, decisive legal ruling that keeps this case on track and able to be tried before the election, but it could also lead to greater delay. It really depends on how the justices see the Constitution and decide it.
Look, one thing that's been amazing since COVID, right, is we get to hear the oral arguments. We get to actually hear the justices ask these questions, which we will tomorrow. I once heard somebody say Supreme Court arguments, which you've done a lot of, are about counting to 5. Are we going to be able to count to 5 tomorrow, you think, and sort of see where the justices are?
I think we will get...
What are you going to watch for?
Yeah, we'll get a very strong sense of where they come down. Look, predicting outcomes of Supreme Court decisions based on the questions the justices ask is a hazardous business. You're often proven wrong. But the justices do show their hand. They will ask leading questions. They will ask questions not so much for the benefit of the lawyer, but for the benefit of their colleagues, so that their colleagues will hear a certain line of argument. There's a lot of strategic gamesmanship going on among the justices during an argument. But I think we will know by noon tomorrow which way the justices are leaning.
Interesting. Being wrong has never stopped anyone on cable news before.
That is true.
Interesting piece in the New York Times. This is from Andrew Weissman, among others. Despite the widespread assumption that it will not change the application of immunity to this case, and the sluggish pace chosen to hear it means that it will have needlessly delayed legal accountability for no justifiable reason. The Supreme Court has already botched the Trump immunity case. Is there any way to read that as a legal argument and not a political one?
I don't think so. Look, legally, I mean, I respect Andrew Weissman, but I will say this. The Supreme Court marches at its own pace, and the way they have treated this case actually is a lot faster, dramatically faster than they address most cases. By Supreme Court standards, they're hearing and deciding this case at lightning speed. I realize that it is not fast enough for those who do want to see Trump prosecuted and a verdict rendered before the election, but by Supreme Court standards, they're moving pretty darn quickly.
Right, and then we had a couple of weeks ago the case in terms of whether or not the indictments at all against a number of the January 6th folks would be thrown out because of the application of this law. We look at the Supreme Court of the United States makeup, liberals versus conservatives, who they were appointed by, I should say, 6-3. What are you going to be watching for tomorrow that would tell you either A, Donald Trump has a chance to not go on trial before the election, or B, that's where we're headed?
What I'm going to be looking at is whether any of the justices, and particularly you're going to keep an eye on Chief Justice Roberts, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Barrett, to see if they are trying to scope out some sort of middle ground. And what I mean by that is a decision that doesn't fully 100% endorse what the Court of Appeals decided, which is just simply no immunity at all. But rather if they say, look, maybe there is some immunity here, but we need to figure out exactly what it is. If they start searching for that middle ground, I think that would be a signal that they could render a decision that doesn't resolve this all decisively, and that would lead to a longer proceeding in the trial court.
All right, Mr. Dupree, we'll be listening tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. Police in Oklahoma just arrested a fifth person in the killing of two mothers. 31-year-old Paul Grice allegedly confessed to the murders. Grice is part of the anti-government group called God's Misfits. We're now up to 5. Police say he worked alongside Tiffany Adams and 3 other suspects in the killings of Veronica Butler, Jillian Kelly. Butler was the mother of Adams' 2 grandchildren involved in a bitter custody dispute. Brian Enton, NewsNation senior correspondent, who spent a week in Kansas and Oklahoma tracking this case. He's in for Cuomo tonight. Surprise here that this 5th arrest, Brian?
Not much of a surprise, Leland, because Paul Grice was named in the initial affidavits, and we knew that police were investigating him and that he was believed to be involved. But when they made the first 4 arrests, Paul Grice was still at home, and they brought him in, they questioned him, but then they let him out and they let him go. We weren't really sure what was going on. There was a lot of outrage in the community. Why is he named in the affidavit but still not in custody? Well, today that all changed. That's his picture right there, his mugshot. They took Paul Grice into custody, charged him with murder. We're told they went out to his house and they actually interviewed him yesterday for the first time, and that he admitted to being a part of it all. And they brought him in, arrested him. Another interesting new tidbit that we've been able to confirm today for the first time, Leland, through the medical examiner, is that the 2 victims were not shot. They are not saying exactly what the cause of death was, but saying that they weren't shot. And we're going to really dive into that. We've got a ton of new information. We're going to discuss it coming up in the next hour on Cuomo.
All right, what else you got?
Well, we're going to obviously continue to follow the protests, Leland. I don't know if you read Alan Dershowitz's opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal, upset with the way that Biden has been handling it, and his statement almost comparing it to Trump during Charlottesville, what he said. We've got Professor Dershowitz on the show tonight. We're going to hammer that out, and we've got a full hour. We've got a busy hour for you, Leland.
All right, we'll be watching. Brian, thank you very much. Obviously, we're going to keep an eye on campuses across the country, as well as I know Brian will throughout the evening. Newsflash here. Big news happened overnight. Donald Trump and Joe Biden each won in the Pennsylvania primary last night. Why their victories create more problems than they solve for campaigns. %, which means nearly 20% of the Republican primary electorate didn't vote for him. Those votes went to Nikki Haley, who ended her campaign a month ago. Last night, 150,000 votes went to Haley. In 2016, Trump won by only 44,000 votes, meaning he won the general election in Pennsylvania by 44,000 votes. Fast forward to 2020, and he lost the state by 81,000 votes, all less than 150,000 votes. It's not looking a whole lot better for President Biden. The uncommitted votes in the Democratic primary threatened what was his margin in 2020. He won by about 80,000 votes. 58,000 voted uncommitted in Pennsylvania. You go down, Michigan threatens his margins there. Minnesota, same thing. We're getting there. Wisconsin especially. The number of uncommitteds is larger than his margin of victory. Scott Tranter, Director of Data Science at Decision Desk HQ. Kurt Bardella, NewsNation contributor and Democratic strategist. All right, Scott, we're going to combine this with the fact that in swing state polling right now, as it stands today, Donald Trump is up overall. Who'd you rather be?
I'd still rather be Donald Trump because of what you said. The swing state polling is what it is. Actually, an hour ago, nationally, Donald Trump and Joe Biden in the DDHQ, the Hill polling average, are tied. First time they've ever been tied in 6 months.
Well, but that means that Donald Trump's trending down and Joe Biden's trending up.
Correct. Nationally. We don't elect our president nationally. It's that swing state polling average you're talking about. And so usually the national is sometimes a foreshadowing for some of these battleground states. So, we're going to have this conversation in a month right now. But in the battleground states, I'd rather be Donald Trump.
Scott's wrong. I'd rather be Joe Biden. I think that what we saw in Pennsylvania particularly, I think that is more worrisome if you're Donald Trump than prefer someone else or not even another candidate type thing. Like, they are specifically picking Nikki Haley, who is not running and hasn't been running for a really long time at this point. 16% of the Republican voters there are like, yeah, we're not gonna go with Donald Trump, even though we know he's the nominee. It's like, that is a giant source, like that's like more than 150,000 votes or something went for Nikki Haley.
It's also something, to be fair, the uncommitted push on Joe Biden seems to be largely about this issue of Gaza.
Right.
We can spend a long time on that issue, but it's about that issue. And you think about Summer Lee, who is there, who's been tweeting about genocide and on and on and on. And then look, there's a big part of the Democratic Party that's Hamas adjacent. That said, there's no issue for Donald Trump that there's this wedge issue on. Those 150,000 people, Scott, actively just don't like him.
Yeah, no, and they came out in an election. They checked a box, they sent out a piece of mail, and it's not like some of those ABEV votes, those early votes, were sent when Nikki Haley was still in the race. They were sent after she was clearly out of the race. And, those are voters that Trump is going to need to get back if he's going to close the gap, especially when you factor in that RFK in the state of Pennsylvania, which he's qualified to get into, is polling at between 6 and 7%.
Wow. All right, so you think about now when Donald Trump is not on the campaign trail, although he has a rally now he's scheduled for next Wednesday in Michigan, when he's in court every day. He talks about how, hey, I'm in court and not on the campaign trail. Take a listen. All right, so we don't have the soundbite, but he says they're keeping me in a courtroom, then goes on to attack Joe Biden. I guess, Kurt, reasonable people can agree that the cases are not going the way Democrats would have hoped for them to go, all the criminal cases against Joe Biden. But they're going well enough, the cases against Donald Trump, not as well as Joe Biden would like. Mm-hmm. I guess, though, when Trump says he should be on the campaign trail, this sort of proves he's right.
Right. Well, and I think that's the thing. It's not how well the cases go. It's that every single day that Donald Trump is spending in a courtroom and not on the campaign trail, not in Arizona or Georgia or Michigan or Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or wherever, that's a win for the Democrats, in my opinion. That's a win for the campaign. Any campaign that's campaigning from a courtroom, that's not going to be a winning campaign.
The counter data point to that, though, is every time he comes to the camera and complains about the deep state and legalizing or weaponizing the courts, he raises a lot of money, and he needs the money to compete. So,
but does going there and complaining do well with his base, or does that do anything for the 150,000 people in Pennsylvania who voted against him?
So it doesn't do a whole lot for those 150,000 or those swing voters, but he needs money to convince them, and it does do well for him on the fundraising side.
Yeah, except that money's going to be spent on his legal defense fund and not on persuading
that
voters.
I can't speak to. That might be where it is, but yeah.
Look, we made this graphic especially for you, Scott, betting odds for president. Yeah. You're betting on the guy who's 10 cents down?
Yeah, but there's some value there. Now, here's what I would say, right? This is why I like
you bet this much to win $1.
You bet this much to win $1, but this is like a market. Trump might be at 45 today. He might be at 65 here in a month. He might drop down to 35. I think, and quote me on this, someone clipped this out here, we are going to see multiple lead changes, right, between now and the end. We're going to have Joe Biden's going to have a good week where I'm going to say I'm going to want to be Joe Biden. Trump is having a pretty good week in the swing state polls. That's why I say it now. We're going to have multiple lead changes. So what I would say is take the Trump at 45, maybe sell it at 65, and then buy some Biden. Go back and forth on some of this.
Stock advice from Scott Tranter. I mean, I don't think Scott's wrong, by the way, on that. I think that there are going to be fluctuations. I think there are going to be a lot of ups and downs. I don't think at any point in time will either of these two really be pulling outside the margin of error against one another.
Yeah, well, at least the trend lines right now, Joe Biden nationally trending up, Donald Trump.
Let me leave you with one more data point. Last night in Pennsylvania, we had a race that you showed up. 90% of the vote in Pennsylvania was counted before midnight. That was not the case in 2020. That is a good data point come this fall, considering that Pennsylvania is going to be a key state. We might not have to wait 4 days for a state that decides it.
I was just going to say, people to ask you, what do you hope for in the election?
Yeah.
You hope to know
a quick resolution.
That night. Yeah, exactly. All right, gentlemen, good to see you. Thank you. Every year, NFL teams tell their fans, the New York Giants are saying it this year, that this is him. This is the guy who will take us to the Super Bowl. And every year, those promises are broken. Giants fans' hearts will be broken again. Why NFL teams are so bad at drafting quarterbacks. Plus, live pictures right now at one of the many college campuses across the country. Ann Arbor, Michigan, for example. Long live the Intifada, meaning the violent uprising and killing of Jews. That's what it means. Why do these keep spreading? And what's happening in Texas that perhaps some folks could learn from when we come back? Tomorrow is the 2024 NFL Draft, and teams will draft the best quarterback prospects. The experts say will be the best grab for their teams, but they always, they rarely get it right.
With the first pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Jacksonville Jaguars select Trevor Lawrence, quarterback, Clemson. With the second pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the New York Jets select Zach Wilson, quarterback, BYU.
15th pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the 6-time world champion New England Patriots select Mac Jones.
There were 5 quarterbacks selected in the first 15 picks in 2021, and yet Trevor Lawrence is the only quarterback still on the same team who drafted him. They were paid a combined and guaranteed a combined hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet the team seems so bad at picking quarterbacks. The reality is the NFL teams have no idea how long these quarterbacks will last until they get out on the field. And yet the top 3 picks tomorrow are expected to be quarterbacks. Sports radio host Garrett Bush joins us. What is it? The teams just have to sort of sell false hope to their fan base?
Well, quarterback is the most important position on the field, and I would know all too well the Cleveland Browns have whiffed on quarterbacks year after year after year. So you got an expert in whiffing on quarterbacks here on your show. So, the reason the quarterbacks go the first 3 rounds is because the quarterback, if you don't have one, you just heard the soundbite, the New England Patriots, 6-time Super Bowl champs. The common denominator with those 6 Super Bowls were one Tom Brady. So when you get a good quarterback, you really, put yourself in a position to win a Super Bowl.
Yeah, fair enough. On the flip side of that, right, Brock Purdy picked last, like dead last, right, for the San Francisco 49ers, the last guy picked. He ended up going to the Super Bowl, 7th round, 41st pick. Patrick Mahomes, 1st round, 10th pick, fine. Tom Brady drafted in 2000, 6th round, the 199th pick, and he won 7 Super Bowls. So how is it that with something where so much money is involved and fans care so much that you have absolutely no idea whether the guy who was great in college and on and on and on is going to be good in the NFL?
Well, I'll give you an analogy. Right now, it's political season, right? You just had 2 pundits on, and they talk about polling and Trump and Biden, what it's going to be. Everyone likes to pick the president, but for the president to get his agenda done, he has to have the House and he has to have the Senate, right? You have to have people that are around you that can get your agenda passed. For quarterbacks, you got to have the general manager, you got to have the head coach to put people around you. So often we put these guys on pedestals, but we forget that we got to have the infrastructure, offensive line, the skilled weapons, and the general manager be able to put a team together on the field around the salary cap. So that's why it's important to find a diamond in the rough like your Brock Purdy's, who coming around in the 6th round or 7th round, and then you can allocate resources to making the team around him better.
All right. Real quick, Deshaun Watson evidently went to Saudi Arabia. He's your quarterback right now in Cleveland. He's tweeted about how much he likes Saudi Arabia going there. Don't you guys have enough problems in Cleveland?
Hey, you know, I was looking at I seen Twitter. I said, oh, man, yeah, United States and Saudi, we're going through a couple of issues right here. The foreign policy people ain't going to be too happy with that. I would rather see, talks of, trips and hanging out with the family and maybe quarterback play and getting with your team. I wouldn't be putting too many Saudi tweets out there. I'm not going to do that.
All right. There you go. Jared, it's good to see you, my friend. Thank you very much. We return to our top story. Yeah, good to see you. We return to our top story in live pictures at the University of Michigan. Campus Watch. Take a look. The sign at their encampment at the University of Michigan says, "Long live the Intifada." Okay? The Intifada is the violent uprising against Jews. The Intifada is what Hamas, a terrorist organization, is behind. That's what these students are for. The one thing you don't hear about at any of these protests really anymore, you don't hear about the civilians, and there are civilian Palestinians who are caught, who are in a terrible situation. Hamas is responsible for that too. If these people really cared about the Palestinian civilians, they'd be saying that Hamas should, surrender. Hamas should leave Gaza and allow Palestinians to live in peace. The other thing that you don't hear about is the hostages, and we did today, because Hamas wanted to remind us of what they're about. They're not about the Palestinians. They're about killing Israelis and killing Jews. And they put out a video today of Hirsch Goldberg Pollen. In the picture of him, we will not show the whole video, but in the video you see him there with an arm with no hand on it. He had a hand when Hamas kidnapped him on October 7th. He doesn't now. These are the people who all of these students, the people who did this to Hirsch, to an American, that's who these people are supporting. They're supporting Hamas. There is no other way to look at it. It's not just at the University of Michigan, of course. It's at Columbia University. It's at UC Berkeley. It's at USC. It's spreading across America. Thousands upon thousands of college kids supporting people who are holding Americans hostage, who are torturing Americans, who raped American women and sexually assaulted them. That's who all of these kids are supporting. And the President of the United States basically has been silent and has winked and nodded at the protesters and the marchers. When you think about this, think about Hirsch's parents tonight. Put it in perspective. American parents, just like you who are watching and thinking about your kids. For more than 200 days, their son has been held, and this is the first video they've gotten of him. That's who these folks on college campuses across America are supporting. Here's Brian from New York.
We just can't allow this kind of hatred and anti-Semitism to flourish on our campuses, and it must be stopped in its tracks. Those who are perpetrating this violence should be arrested.
Hey, everybody, I'm Brian Enton, filling in for Chris Cuomo.